And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me, as always, is my beautiful co-host Laraib. As we are super excited to break down an awesome week of playoff football. The divisional round is over. We have our final four teams cemented in for the championship round, Laraib. I'm just so excited, but I'm also kind of sad that we're almost done, but we're so close to crowning a winner to this whole dang thing. Uh, what do you want to say before we really hop into this, Laurent?
Well, I just want to say, thank you to all our viewers. Has been, a really, really great season. And it's been awesome to, just share it with you guys. This is like our second official time doing a season all the way through. So thank you for being here.
Yep.
Thank you for supporting us. All the views are greatly appreciated. All the comments are greatly appreciated. Like you mentioned, this is an up and down part of the season. We're coming to the end, but it was such a great ride. But Lewis, let's get into discussing some of these divisional games, Lewis. So I want to start off with the Buffalo Bills losing to the Cincinnati Bengals after being a 6-point favorite at home, Lewis. And now we've seen this for the past couple of years now from the Bills, these heartbreaking losses in the playoffs. But in this one, I think they got soundly defeated by the Cincinnati Bengals. And so what are your reactions from this game? And, what can this Bills team to move forward to, get over that hump?
Well, first, my biggest reaction as it pertains to this podcast is obviously this was the only game we disagreed on this week, and I picked the Bills, so egg on my face. I understand that. So now we are tied going in to next week's games in the picks, but we'll get to that in our next episode. But for this game specifically, I mean, you have to win this game if you're the Bills. I played into the emotion, the home crowd, everything like that when the stats were staring at me in the face that this Bengals team was just better. I thought that the Bills pass rush was a bit more effective than it obviously was because it was nowhere near as effective as it could have been against this Bengals depleted offensive line, which, by the way, played outstanding in this game. There was Joe Burrow sacked once. I don't know. I don't even think he was. And if he was, it was super inconsequential to the game's outcome, obviously. But I mean, for the Bills, you got to really take a hard look in the mirror after a game like this because let's focus on the game. You were just completely outplayed in this matchup. In short yardage gains by the Bengals, just nickel and diming you all the way down the field. Those first two offensive drives, you give up touchdowns on both drives, and then it's like 14-0 out of nowhere. And meanwhile, the Bills go 3 and out, and it's like, what a nightmare start to a game to where at the end of the first quarter, you look up and Bengals are up 14-0, and then it's just an uphill climb from there. And the Bills they were a team that isn't really designed to come back. Like, they're a big front-running team. We've seen it all year. When they get a lead, they kill you. But recently, this team that's just been playing too many close games, they've been turning the ball over too much. It feels like their identity has gone. And from the beginning of the season, I feel like the loss of Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator really started to play an effect on this Bills offense because they were out of rhythm. They could never really get an identity. And you imagine in a lot of these situations in these big games, you want to see Josh Allen run the football because he is their best running. And he didn't run it all in the first half of that game where they were just dominated. And he started to run more in the second half where they had some success, but it was just too little too late. So the lack of identity, lack of chemistry really has, big questions for this game because how big of an impact did Brian Daboll have on this team? It seemed like it was a lot bigger than a lot of us had let on. This offense was like, there was a 3rd and 2 play in which any other team, the Bengals, the Chiefs, how often do they convert 3rd and 2s? That's so easy in those offenses where they just have so many ways they can beat you. And they just throw a deep ball to Gabe Davis that goes incomplete. I mean, don't go broke trying to get a profit, right? Just take what you can get and move on. So it was frustrating to watch this offense. And for the Bills long-term, Laura, there's some really big questions they need to ask themselves. And the biggest question I'm asking is Sean McDermott the right head coach for this team? Because we saw in the playoffs, all 8 teams had offensive coaches except for one, and that was the Bills with Sean McDermott, a defensive-minded head coach. In 2023 in the NFL, the biggest way you win games is creative offense and identity. All the teams in the playoffs either have top A1 quarterbacks or a strong offensive identity that they can lean on in big moments. Like 3rd and 2, the Eagles and the 49ers are going to have some creative run play or play action to get them out of it. 3rd and 2, the Chiefs and the Bengals, they have Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. They're going to find a way to convert it. But if you're the Bills, it's like, does Josh Allen run the ball? We don't really have any intermediate guys. Like Cole Beasley was the leading receiver on the team yesterday, and he was signed like 2 weeks ago. That's unacceptable for a team that, could have been the number one team in the AFC. So there's a lot of big conversation that need to be had. I'm not exactly calling for Sean McDermott's job because he's done nothing but succeed. But at the end of the day, you got to think to yourself, long term, what's going to work for Josh Allen? And we saw him most successful last season with Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator. So we'll see what happens, Laraib.
Well, Lewis, I do want to say, Josh Allen's numbers in the regular season were pretty much identical to what they were last year with Brian Daboll and versus Ken Dorsey. So, there's that. But the issue with this team, Lewis, for the past 5 years has been their run game. Now, I don't understand how a team with an offensive line like that, and the type of offensive coordinators they have, and Ken Dorsey, and they used to have Brian Daboll, can't run the ball. It's honestly, Lewis, is ridiculous at this point. My Seattle Seahawks, even with the banged up offensive line, not that good offensive line, they're still able to run the ball here and there. You see some other teams in the league, they can still run the ball effectively, even with a bad offensive line, even with a bad quarterback. And now here you have the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen, who's a dual threat quarterback with a great offensive line, with some great receivers and Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox. And they still aren't able to effectively run the ball. And that's what's hindering this team, Lewis. We talk about when it gets really, really cold, December football, January football is about pounding the ball. Even the Chiefs, who we don't think have the best run game, Isaiah Pacheco goes for over 60 yards. And I think the team has over 100 rushing yards overall. Right, this Bengals team would really put the game away, Lewis. An underrated factor in the game was Joe Mixon picking up those, long 8-yard runs, 5-yard runs towards the end of the game, kind of just icing it and keeping it away from the Bills. And so this run game for this Bills team is going to really have to, something's going to have to change. If I knew what to do, Lewis, I wouldn't be here on this podcast. I would be on an NFL team telling them what to do. And if I had some magic solution, but I don't. All I can say is, Christian McCaffrey got traded to this 49ers team, and they've been undefeated since he was a starter, right? There were some talks about Alvin Kamara maybe going. Saquon Barkley's a free agent this season, Lewis. And so, we don't like to pay. You and I both agree we don't like to overpay running backs, but being able to draft somebody decent, James Cook was a receiving back, but you didn't need that. You need somebody who could actually run between the tackles. Devin Singletary, we know he can't do that. In the past couple of years, he's not been right. Haven't been able to see him do that. So go out, draft somebody in the first, second, or third round. Maybe not the first round, but get somebody later in the draft who can run between the tackles and pick up some good yards. And then we'll see what this Bills team can do, Lewis. And talking about Stephon Diggs a little bit, he only had 35 receiving yards in this game. Now you can say he was doubled. A lot of people like to call him top 5 receiver in the league, but we see guys like Deebo Samuel still went out and performed. We see guys like CeeDee Lamb went out and performed. DK Metcalf went out and performed in the playoffs. Even Juju Smith-Schuster has some big catches in that game. And so it's been really, really interesting to see how he plays, Lewis. He's always a regular season monster, but even last year going back into the playoffs, they played against the Chiefs, and he did not play that well, Lewis. It was Gabe Davis who put on a show. And so Stephon Diggs, we always see the picture of him, hands on his hips, looking at the other team celebrating, or him walking up to Josh Allen, putting his hands up, but he disappears in the playoffs, Lewis. He really does. And it all really comes down to Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox making those big plays. And so we'll see what this Bills team does from here, Lewis. But I really, really think they need to address the issue of the run game and go out there and draft somebody or pick somebody up who can really, get those 4 or 5 yard runs to make the field a little bit shorter. Because, in that first half, Lewis, they had really, really long third downs, 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s that convert. And you just can't do that in the playoffs against some of these better defenses. I know we don't really think they have huge juggernauts in the AFC, but this Bengals defense, once again, this year, it's been that unit has been the difference maker and why they're going to be in the AFC Championship once again, Lewis.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's just about establishing identity. If you want to make your short passing game an extension of the running game, like we've seen the Bengals and Chiefs kind of do, and yeah, even the 49ers do that as well, and then do that. But they didn't even have a short game at all. That's where you'd think a guy like Stephon Diggs would dominate, is those quick outs, those, in routes, just 8 yards, 7 yards, 6 yards to just help your running game and help your offense in general. Because like you said, they got into a lot of 3rd and long situations where that Bengals pass rush could just tee off on Josh Allen. And there were so many times where they would just bring like 6 people on a blitz and they would get there because these receivers on the outside couldn't separate and you were going all the way down the field. So all these super long games. And yeah, when you have a weapon like Josh Allen's arm, you get a little too obsessed with it. You think that it's the end all be all. You can score at any point in the game when in reality, the playoffs, everything is condensed. Everything is 5 yards, it's 8 yards. And on those plays, when you do break it open, it's never a huge blown coverage. I mean, these are the best teams in the NFL. And you have to realize this isn't the Jets on a random Thursday in November. I mean, this is playoff football, and you have to have everything, all the margins, dotted your I's, cross your T's, everything perfect. And this was a sloppy football team that couldn't rely on an identity to keep them going. So I don't know what needs to happen for this team, but it seems like, disappointing into the season. They were the odds-on favorites going in. Even to this week, they were the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl. Now that it's a lost season again for Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. But let's talk quickly about the Bengals in this game, just how impressive they were getting out to that early lead in a snowstorm. We didn't mention that yet, but it was a complete snowstorm. Awesome for January football, especially in Buffalo. But we saw the Bengals just, it was honestly a perfect game. They just get the first 2 touchdowns in the first 2 drives, 2 3-and-outs. So that's the first quarter just over right there, and you have 14-point lead. And like you said earlier, they ran the ball very effectively. And a lot of those first downs, you get 8 yards from P. Ryan or Mixon, and it sets up so much more manageable, second and shorts, third and shorts. And they got like a franchise record 30 first downs. They just moved the ball super effectively. They held the ball more. They had over 20 minutes more possession time because of how effective they were controlling the ball. No turnovers. It was honestly a perfect game plan for this Bengals team. And it seemed like they had a chip on their shoulder from, you're planning on buying the tickets for the neutral site game. Go get those refunds, as Joe Burrow said. I want to talk more about the Bengals, but I think we'll do that more in our next week's episode. But what were your quick thoughts on the Bengals, Laraib?
Well, it was just to see the juxtaposition between these two offensive, right? You talk about the Bills, who like to stretch the field with their wide receivers, but the Bengals with a better receiving core in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and of course our boy Tyler Boyd. They weren't trying to exploit the defense deep. Even with Micah Hyde banged up, Tre'Davious White got banged up on that play. They weren't trying to stretch it deep. They knew what they needed to do. Take the intermediate, take what the defense gives you. Like I said, in playoff football, it's about exploiting those one-on-one matchups, exploiting that zone defense, and just trying to get what the defense gives you. And that's what they did, Lewis. You didn't see anybody, mad on the sidelines. They weren't getting the ball, putting their hands on their heads and shaking. They were playing clean football all around, and they got it done. And that defense, Lewis, that's something to mess with, Lewis. That's not something to mess with. Of course, there's not a lot of household names in there. The biggest household name is Eli Apple, and the most of the reason people are talking about him is getting burnt
for the wrong reasons,
right? But he had a good play on Stephon Diggs. He didn't bite on the double move, and so really clean game from the defense and from the offense, like you mentioned. And going into KC next week, that's not a place that they haven't been to and haven't won before, so that's going to be really fun to watch next week.
All right, well, let's move on to our second game of Sunday's action, Laraib, where we had the Dallas Cowboys losing to San Francisco in a game that we both thought the Cowboys, with their experience at the quarterback position, should have won. And it seemed like early in this game, Brock Purdy, who was feeling the pressure, the Cowboys were, Micah Parsons, Odighizuwa, they were just screaming off the edge and really getting into Brock Purdy and making him feel flustered. But Brock Purdy just so effectively just, adjusted, got used to the pressure, felt in the system, started focusing more instead of, these downfield crossers to guys like Ayuk and Jennings, focus more intermediate, got Christian McCaffrey involved. George Kittle was a huge part in this game, and he really flipped this game for the 49ers, which was so impressive because he's such an elite tight end, but he's had all these injuries and things like that we kind of forget about him. But he is the second best tight end in football ability-wise, and he had a great game in this one. And Brock Purdy, he really stood in there, managed the game well, didn't really force anything, no big turnovers. And that was the difference in this game between him and Dak. And Dak, on the other hand, 2 bad turnovers, clock mismanagement at the end, and just untimely errors. And it was really bad. And once Tony Pollard got injured, it really felt like their offense didn't have anyone except for CeeDee Lamb. And it was just easy to game plan for them after that. So I want to ask you, Laraib, does this pairing of Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott, is this their ceiling, or maybe another retooling of the offense, retooling of the defense, and some other personnel? Could they get back and maybe progress into the next round in future seasons?
Well, Lewis, I don't know what else this team can really do Personnel wise, you talk about the defense, one of the, top 5, top 3 units in the whole league. And then you flip it over to the other side, you have Dak Prescott, Pro Bowl quarterback who played, we saw what he could do last week, right, against the Buccaneers. We saw CeeDee Lamb, the step he took forward from last year to this year has been outstanding. And of course, Dalton Schultz really came on this season. And so, what can you do personnel wise to get better than this? I mean, I really don't see a team who can, grow more from here. Right. And of course, just the play calling in this one, Dak Prescott, man, it's been ridiculous. Every single time the Cowboys make the playoffs, and he just has these terrible, terrible turnovers. We saw what he could do against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how he could just wheel and deal against that defense. And then if you come into San Francisco and the lights are just too bright for you, the defense is, has you read like a playbook. And so for this team to get any higher from here, Lewis, of course, you'd like to say, if this play goes their way, or if they have a different call right here, they could be moving on. But, to say that they could get any better than this, I don't think they can, Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to really say because, if that game was played in Dallas, they have a better regular season record. Maybe they win the division. Who knows? Maybe they get to the championship game. But I think it doesn't really matter. I think there's a definitive ceiling on this team. Dak just seems like a mid-tier quarterback. Everything has to be perfect around him. He needs to have the perfect weapons, amazing offensive line. And to give the Cowboys credit, they had a great offensive line, and it seemed like they had a good game plan going into this game, really running the ball, getting Tony Pollard involved. Like we said, when we picked this team, that would be a huge part of the offense. So him getting injured was a big deal. But then some of the late game execution is like that always made us apprehensive with this Mike McCarthy-Dak duo. Just on that last drive, the bad clock management. And there was a play. I mean, yeah, it was 4th and 10, and there was 2 minutes left, and it seemed like, they were in their own territory, so it's like, you have to punt it here. But if Elijah Mitchell doesn't go out of bounds for the 49ers could have just ended the game right then and there on that next drive. And down the scores they were down, you have to be aggressive there. But they obviously showed you by that play call that Mike McCarthy didn't trust Dak. So on that next drive, that last drive was, you have to get it now. Because you'd face similar, circumstances with less time and no timeouts later in the game, and they couldn't do it. Special shout out to Dalton Schultz for really screwing the Cowboys in this one, going out of bounds, not realizing he didn't get his second foot down in the most crucial play in a playoff game. I guess it happens. No, that was awful. And that example, and then that last play was so dumb. And I get it, like maybe it was designed for Turpin to go behind blocks and snake his way towards the end zone, but he just got tackled immediately. Dak had pressure because he had Ezekiel Elliott as his sole, blocker, which was just so dumb. And you have to do a Hail Mary there or a, 18 yards pitch fest to try to get something. You have to give your team a chance. That play call was too cute, was trying to reinvent the wheel. Just throw it up. Crazier things have happened in a game. And honestly, when I saw they weren't throwing a Hail Mary, I was 1,000% confident it wasn't going to work because the 49ers team is too smart to fall for whatever stupid gimmick Mike McCarthy cooked up in a basement at 3 a.m. on Wednesday. So I don't trust that at all. And for this Cowboys team, I want to have the same conversation we had about Buffalo about, finding specific things, but it just seems like it's the franchise at this point. It's the ownership. It's, Dak. They're just doomed to be mediocre. And I feel like we're just going to keep going in this circle of, Cowboys, underwhelmingness. And that's how it's been all my life. It's all your life as well. We never experienced the 90s. So I don't know what to say about this team. They might win the division next year. They'll probably lose to a team like, I don't know, the Rams or something. And we'll be on the same path next year. So there's not for me much to say about the Cowboys long term. All I will say is that for the Niners' sake, I was very impressed by Brock Purdy coming back and really finding his rhythm in this game and having some huge scoring drives late in that game. And I'm impressed with the 49ers going forward.
Yeah, Lewis, talking about the 49ers a little bit, we both said this, going into the Kyle Shanahan system is, the greatest spot for a quarterback to be, but it still takes somebody to have some poise in the pocket. You still have to be able to make the throws, right? And just his calm and collectedness in the pocket, Lewis, is something I've never seen out of a rookie like that. Of course, the last rookie to win a playoff game was Russell Wilson, but now, we see Brock Purdy on just an absolute tear. Now, rookie quarterback is going to be playing in the NFC Championship. which is just going to be really, really awesome to see. Of course, I'm a Seahawks fan. I'm not really a big fan of the 49ers, but it's still good to see a young quarterback who was Mr. Irrelevant going out there and going to the NFC Championship, and just his collectedness, this team's collectedness, Lewis. That's some really bad, defensive penalties, some unnecessary roughness when players are going out of bounds. But, it's going to take a complete game from this team next week facing the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about that on Thursday. But, Lewis, let's move on to those Philadelphia Eagles team. They faced the Giants, and we said this game was going to be, a really, really close game. It's going to be a really fun game, but it really wasn't. The Giants players can't, the Giants had a couple players come back from injury. Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones had a great game against that Vikings defense a week earlier, but now they went into the Lions den and they wish they didn't in this one. Brian Daboll, of course, coach of the year this year, but Nick Sirianni looks like he might actually deserve that mantle. But, Lewis, this Eagles team, we thought they might falter a little bit, especially with, quarterback Jalen Hurts only playing his second game in a month, but he looked out there. He was playing outstanding. Of course, AJ Brown really didn't get involved that much, but really it was Miles Sanders on the ground who just dominated this game for the Eagles. And now this Giants team, Lewis, this is a really, really great, successful season for them. But moving forward, they're going to need some more help on the outside, of course. The defense is solid, but they can still, use some of those good linebackers and some, a good run stopper on defense. And so what do you see for this Giants team moving forward? Or do you want to talk a little bit more about this game?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to focus on this game just for a second here with the Giants. And I predicted to be a close game with the Eagles winning. And it seemed like that could have been the case, but the Giants' early game execution was so, off from what we've expected from them. And like you said, Brian Daboll has been an amazing coach all season, but the questionable decision to go for it on 4th and 8 and, really like the midfield mark when, you just got sacked. Momentum was clearly on the Eagles side. They just scored a touchdown and you try to go for it there to make a ballsy play. It's incomplete. And then the Eagles from midfield just go and score another touchdown. And it really gets out of hand because the Giants' strength is running the ball and playing these long drives. And that's why I thought it would be a closer game, but the Eagles would predominantly win because of Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones, who I don't really think played bad in this game, but it seemed like after that first interception he threw to James Bradbury, who made an amazing play on the ball, it seemed like he was so apprehensive, really waiting for windows to open, not really playing risky whatsoever. And at that point, it was just so many third and longs, because he couldn't really establish a run. They started kind of getting a running game going late in the early in the third quarter, but at that point it was like almost like game over because the Eagles were up 28-0. So big credit to the Eagles in this game. Jalen Hurts looked really good. There were some runs where he kind of appeared apprehensive, didn't really want to put all of his body weight into there, so maybe the shoulder is still kind of bothering him, but it didn't really feel like it, that at least in the throwing game, where he made a bunch of impressive throws to Devontae Smith to start the game, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Running the ball, also Miles Sanders. I just think it was a great Eagles performance. And let's talk about the Giants now. I think when we brought up the question last week, like, is Daniel Jones a franchise quarterback? I said, no, he's not a franchise quarterback, but he's the Giants quarterback. And I still believe that's the case. I think he can be successful, get him some upgraded weapons, get him maybe some more help on the interior of that offensive line. And I think he can be successful. But at the same time, you look at the other quarterbacks or in the other offensive systems that are in the playoffs right now, if they just have a really good offensive system, which I think with Brian Daboll they can, then they can be back in this situation even with Daniel Jones. I wouldn't pay him that much, especially after a performance like that. But then again, it's so funny when you look at the AFC and the NFC and you look at the young quarterbacks in both conferences. The AFC, there's so many great young quarterbacks: Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and obviously Mahomes and Burrow, who are playing next week. And then you look at the NFC and it's like, you have Hurts, and then was it Kyler? I don't love that. Is it Justin Fields? I really don't love that. So at some point, the Giants would be like, well, we're not in a huge rush to beat those top dogs in the AFC. We just have to have a good, sound, defensive, heavy running team like we see from the Eagles and the 49ers, who are playing in the championship right now. So I don't think they're too far off, and I don't want them to panic and make any crazy, quarterback moves, because I think Daniel Jones is a serviceable quarterback, but ultimately there's a ceiling there.
Yeah, for sure. And we've seen, you talk about a lot of these teams who are in the championship next week, Lewis. They have a top receiver, right? This is what we talk about. We talk about this all season long. Some of these teams have their offensive just transform once they get that number one receiver. You look at the Eagles, the 49ers, the Deebo Samuel. Of
Right.
course, for the Chiefs, maybe they don't have the top receiver. Juju, maybe not
Kelsey.
same caliber, right?
Kelsey's amazing.
But Travis Kelsey, right?
Right.
Of course, and so for this Giants team, hopefully they lean wide receiver in the draft. A lot of questions about some free agents going. Of course, Saquon Barkley has some big decisions. But what we like to say: don't overpay the running back position, unless you're the Buffalo Bills and you can't run the ball. And so, interesting offseason for this team. Of course, maybe not some huge juggernauts in the NFC, Lewis, so we could see them right back in the playoffs next year. But let's move on to another game. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kansas City Chiefs, Lewis. And, for the Jaguars, another team like the Giants, a team maybe we didn't expect to make the playoffs. A young quarterback who's been up and down, but they were able to get in. They won a game, but then they just ran into the Chiefs. And, they could have won that game late. Jamal Agnew fumble kind of just flipped it on its head. But really, really great performance from this team, Lewis. And I'd like to see them right back here next year, right? Trevor Lawrence, if he builds that consistency with Doug Peterson, of course, the receiving core has been solid, right? A lot of people questioning them overpaying, bringing in all those receivers, but it looked like it really paid off for them. And so we'll see what this team can do next season, Lewis. But for the Chiefs, just another great year for them. Patrick Mahomes with a high ankle sprain. So we'll see what that is for them on the championship. But for this Jacksonville team, just an outstanding season for them.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of these teams based off, season expectations. We spent, 10 minutes ripping the Bills, and they lost in the same round as the Jags. But we're going to praise the Jags because they just had the number one pick in the whole draft 2 straight seasons in a row. And now they find themselves in a close game in Kansas City, which honestly, Laraib, with the way that game was going, I think they should have won. They could have come back late and won that game if it wasn't for the, unfortunate turnovers late in that game with Jamal Agnew and then Trevor Lawrence interception. But the biggest story for me in this game, credit to the Jags, they had a great season. All the faith in Doug Peterson. I think he's a good coach and he's proved it. I think they're going to have a really successful offseason, and they're going to be back in this situation. I think they're going to win the AFC South again, as that division looks very winnable even next season, unless some crazy things happen. But to talk about the biggest storyline in this game, it was definitely the Mahomes injury. High ankle sprain he suffered, I think, in the second quarter. It looked really bad. He just couldn't put any pressure on it. His entire running game, scrambling game was severely hindered by that ankle sprain. We saw Chad Henne come into the game and lead a 98-yard drive, which honestly was just an Andy Reid masterclass right there. And so I think that was great. But obviously that's not sustainable. You can't have Chad Henne starting in a playoff game. So Mahomes will start next week. But Laraib, how does this affect the Chiefs offense?
Well, Lewis, like you mentioned, it's a running game. Underrated part of this Chiefs offense is Patrick Mahomes, escaping the pocket and making a great throw down the field, or, just a big gap opens up between the tackles and he just takes off for a bunch of yards, right? We saw against, one of his most spectacular plays against the Tennessee Titans in the AFC Championship a few weeks ago. That's all you can think about of him just bouncing off Titans defenders and then going for that long 20-yard touchdown. So it's going to be a different sort of, game for this team with Patrick Mahomes. Of course, as a pocket passer, he is the best pocket passer in the NFL, Lewis. And so with him and Travis Kelsey, you can never count them out. But, I saw them struggle a little bit, Lewis, against this Jacksonville Jaguars defense. And now the Cincinnati Bengals, who are rearing to go once again, who have beaten this team 3 times in a row, Lewis. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to have his hands full next week.
Yeah, we'll get into that one. But I think one of the biggest things for me that the Chiefs were able to do in this game was really get a power running game going with Isaiah Pacheco, which was huge for this game to really get the ball out of the Jags' hands, because we saw what they did last week against the Chargers and how they can really come back on against anybody. And that was huge for, keeping this a possession game, just moving the sticks. He looked very impressive to me, and it was a huge part of this Chiefs offense because, Kelsey with 14 catches, that's unsustainable for an offense. You need to get more guys involved. So seeing Pacheco, have almost over 100 rushing yards on the ground was huge for this offense, especially with the hindered Mahomes. Is that going to be sustainable for next week? We'll talk about it in our next episode. But, obviously Chiefs hosting the AFC Championship for the 5th year in a row. It's just a testament to how great Andy Reid and Mahomes have been since Mahomes has been the starter. And, the Super Bowl goes through Kansas City, and we'll see about that going forward. But, at the end, just wrapping it up, great season for the Jags. Great season for the Giants too, to be in the playoffs, based off expectations before the season. This is the honeymoon phase for teams where they get their big, postseason, they get their win in the wild card round, lose to a clearly better team, and now they can go into the offseason with, high hopes and expectations for next season. And we'll see what happens from there, because it can go sideways fast, as we are now discussing the Bills' potential demise and the Cowboys. But that's going to do it for this week's episode, Laraib. As always, all of our links are in our socials, are in the bio below for all of our socials. So make sure you check those out. As we're going to mention, our next episode covering championship weekend, 2 games, but we're going to give you in-depth analysis and our picks, which we are tied right now. And I know we're going to disagree on some games. So it's going to be a super exciting episode going forward. That will be released on Thursday. Rob, anything you want to say before we head out?
Nope. I think that's going to be First and Goal podcast. Signing off.
Peace.